Okay, guys, this is a screencast-o-matic presentation on Chapter 4, where we're going to actually go inside of the cell. Of course, in order to view many cells, you have to use microscopes because some cells are very, very tiny. Over here, we're going to look at both the plant and the animal cell, different parts of the plant and animal cell, as well as the bacteria. The bacteria, animal, and plant cells, they do have certain organelles per se in common. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at the different parts. So cells, they're pretty diverse. They can be found pretty much anywhere. Our bodies consist of hundreds of them. The heart is a cell, the muscle is a cell, bones are considered cells, which makes them very, very diverse, and which makes us multicellular organisms. We know that a cell is the smallest unit of life as well. And however, as stated, many of them you have to or require a microscope to see them. So the cells in our bodies, of course, they have specific functions, such as the heart cell. The bone cells are needed for movement. The muscle cells are needed for movement. Of course, your bone cells or the skeletal system is what is our framework, gives shape to the body. And our heart cell, of course, is responsible for contracting and or for signal transduction. Many of, like I said, the tiny organisms can be seen with a light microscope, but if you want to look at the surface features and have a detailed view of certain cells, you need electron microscopes, such as a transmission or a scanning electron microscope, which is what you see here with the young lady sitting in the chair. All right, the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane acts as it says, the boundary. It actually regulates what can come into the cell, what can leave the cell. So it kind of acts as a gatekeeper. That's what I call it, a gatekeeper. Of course, it's made up of the phospholipid bilayer. There are many proteins embedded in the phospholipid bilayer. You have your polar heads, which are hydrophilic, and of course, those heads are actually facing the external environment or the water in that particular cell, and you have your nonpolar tails, which are hydrophobic. They fear the water, so the tails are actually facing each other. You also have a group of proteins. Well, it's called the fluid mosaic model. The reason being is the fluid mosaic model, of course, simply means that there is a, I guess you can say, there's a diverse group of proteins in it. Kind of looks like a pattern per se, which it gives it the name the fluid mosaic model because of the diverse groups of proteins. If you look at figure 4.4, you can actually, this figure here is showing you the model of the plasma membrane. You can see the different protein molecules embedded within the plasma membrane. You can also look at the heads that are facing both. This one is facing outside of your cell where the water is. The heads here are facing inside of the cell where the water is. And you have your tails here, which are nonpolar. They're actually facing each other. Okay. So you have different types of proteins. You have channel proteins. They're little tunnels that allow certain things to actually pass through them. They have what you call aquaporins. Aquaporins are channel proteins that allow water. Aqua means water, that allow water to actually pass through the channel. So aquaporins are actually very, very specific. for water to pass into and out of the cell. Our kidneys have aquaporins, because if they did not, we would constantly lose a lot of water and become dehydrated. You also have a transport protein. And as you can see, they're involved in the passage of molecules through the membrane as well. Sometimes they require an input of energy in the form of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the energy currency of the cell. Without ATP, the cell would not be able to carry out its daily activities or to function. So here you can see where the molecule here is going from inside of your cell to the outside of the cell or to the extracellular fluid. A good example of this one is your sodium-potassium pump, which is considered a transport protein. Cell recognition proteins, they enable our body to distinguish between our own cells and cells of other organisms. They're often referred to as identification tags. So what they actually do, they identify self from non-self, and what they actually do is they will, let's take for example, in our immune system we have white blood cells. White blood cells, of course, are responsible for recognizing anything foreign that can enter our bodies, such as viruses, bad bacteria, antigens, things of the like. However, they're supposed to recognize themselves and not attack the other white blood cells. That's why it's often referred to, they're supposed to recognize self from non-self. Receptor proteins allow signal molecules to bind, causing a cellular response. So a really good example of a receptor protein over here would be insulin. After we consume a meal, of course, the amount of sugar or glucose in our blood is going to decrease. However, our pancreas has to release the hormone insulin. Once insulin binds to this, I call it receptor or site on this particular protein, they remove the excess glucose or sugar out of our bloodstream. And sends it to the liver. Enzymatic proteins are biological catalysts. They participate in all of the metabolic reactions that will occur in our bodies. And as you can see, this is called a substrate or a reactant. It's very, very shape specific. This part here has to bind here. Once it binds here, you're going to get product. A reaction is going to occur, and this will be the result of it, which will be a product. And you have junction proteins, where proteins actually can bind to each other. All right, you have the cell theory. All organisms are composed of cells. All cells come from pre-existing cells. Organisms can be, when it says they're composed of cells, simply means they can be unicellular or they can actually be multicellular. We are considered multicellular organisms. However, prokaryotic or your prokaryotes or the bacteria are considered unicellular, which means they only have one cell. There are two main cell types, as you can see here. Now, all of the cells, including the bacteria cell, including the plant cell, and including the animal cell, what do they all have in common? They both have a plasma membrane, which regulates movement of material into and out of your cell. All three have a cytoplasm, where chemical reactions occur. The cytoplasm of both the plant and the animal cell contains organelles such as your endoplasmic reticulum, your rough ER, your smooth ER, the Golgi bodies, your mitochondrion, lysosomes, vesicles, things of that sort. And there's also your genetic material. They all have genetic material, which is our DNA, also called your hereditary material. The genetic material is responsible for which we acquire from our parents. And of course, in both the plant and animal cell, the genetic material is housed inside of the nucleus. However, in bacteria or your prokaryotic cells, the DNA is not in a nucleus, but it's in what you call the nucleolus. As you can see down here, the prokaryotic cells, which are your bacteria, lack the membrane-bound nucleus, but they have the genetic material, DNA, but they just don't have a nucleus. Us, which we are eukaryotic cells as well as plants, we do have this nucleus, which is responsible for housing our DNA. So let's talk a little bit about your prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are organisms from the domains bacteria and archaea. They're pretty small, they're pretty simple, they don't have as many structures as our eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells typically will have ribosomes, cytoplasm, and flagella, pretty much. So they're pretty simple compared to your eukaryotic cells. And of course, they can reproduce fairly quickly. So the bacteria in your archaea, we know belong to those are two domains that we talked about in a previous chapter, along with your eukarya, which was also a domain. They are some of bacteria, of course. They're very diverse. They have multiple roles. Some of them can cause diseases. People get bacterial infections all the time. Others have roles in the environment where they can actually protect the environment. Some are used to manufacture chemicals, food, drugs, and things of that nature. So E. coli in particular, if you read page 62, does an E. coli cause intestinal problems? We do have E. coli in our gut. We also have E. coli other places of the body. So they do have a relationship with us, which can actually be a positive relationship. For food, E. coli, of course, can be found in, well, you have not E. coli, but bacteria that can be used to make things such as yogurt, and yeah, just yogurt, cheese. The lactobacillus is the bacteria that's used actually for that. So drugs, the pharmaceutical industry use bacteria. They place bacteria in drugs as well. Here is what you will actually see. Okay. This, I'm not going to talk about all of this, but this figure right here is 4.6 in your textbook. As stated before, it's not as diverse, but it does have a cytoplasm. It has a plasma membrane, which regulates what can actually enter and leave the cell. The plasma membrane is the same as your eukaryotes, which means your eukaryotes, the plasma membrane of the bacteria is the same as for both the plant and animal cell. You do have the cell wall as well. That's going to help the cell to maintain its shape. There's DNA, the genetic or hereditary material that you can actually see, but it's circular DNA. And you have ribosomes, which is the site of protein synthesis. You have flagella, which allows the bacteria to move. Flagella means movement. Fimbriae, of course, allows it to attach to various surfaces. And you have pili, where bacteria can actually transfer their DNA from one bacteria to the next. Okay, well, I'm going to conclude with the bacteria with the screencast-o-matic. This was the start of chapter 4, and then I'm going to do the eukaryotic next. So this was really pages introduction 57 through 63. All right. Happy listening, guys.